Let me tell you something I was not supposed to live through. I was there, on the deck, close enough that I could have touched her boot if I had been stupid enough to try. And I am telling you this exactly the way it happened, because nobody up the chain wants it written down, and somebody should remember it the way it really went. I have never feared anything the way I feared her. You have to understand what she was first, or none of the rest will land. Her name was Vael, just that. One word the way a blade is one thing. The Asari do not collect titles the way smaller species do because she did not need them. Everyone in 9 star systems already knew the shape of her. The way you know the shape of a storm before it arrives. She was the most powerful living thing in the galaxy, and that is not me being dramatic to keep you watching. It was a fact. It was on the records. It was in the way grown soldiers stopped breathing when she walked. I worked the lower docks of the anchorage back then. Cargo mostly. I am Gemin's small, gray, four-fingered, easy to overlook, which on a station like that is the only useful thing about being Gemin. We were the ones who carried, who scrubbed, who fixed the things nobody important wanted to think about. I had spent 11 years keeping my eyes down and my hands moving, and I was good at it. I planned to die that way. Quiet, unnoticed, old. That was the plan. Then they brought the human in, and the plan came apart in front of me, piece by piece, in a single afternoon. Let me set it for you, because the place matters. The anchorage was not a pretty station. It was a war station, a forward anchor for Vael's fleet, hung at the edge of the Tarn drift where 3 trade lanes knotted together. Imagine a thing the size of a small moon, all gray bone metal and old scorch marks, breathing recycled air that always tasted faintly of ozone, and the inside of a machine. The light up on the command decks was white and surgical. Down where I worked it was amber and dim, full of the low grinding hum of the gravity rings turning, never stopping. There was always sound. That is the thing people who have never lived on a station get wrong. It is never quiet. Coolant ticking in the walls. The deep bass of the engines you stop hearing until the day it changes. Loaders clanking. Somewhere always somebody shouting an order in one of 40 languages. That day the air felt wrong before I knew why. You learn to read a station the way a farmer reads weather. The crowd on the dock was too still. Usually the loading bay is chaos. Conquered soldiers, freight handlers, brokers haggling, half a dozen species pushing past each other. But that morning the soldiers were lined up along the edges, rifles up, faces hard, and everyone else had pressed back against the walls without being told to. Something had been caught. I kept loading my pallet because that is what you do. You keep your hands moving. But I watched out the side of my eye, the way we all learn to. That is when I saw him. The human came off the prison shuttle with his wrists bound behind him, and a split lip, and a calm in his body that did not match anything else in the room. I had never seen a human before. None of us had, really. Humans were new. They had come stumbling into conquered space barely a generation back, soft little things. No claws, no plating, no psionic field, slow and breakable. The galaxy had a name for them in the official records. Tertiary viable. Low threat. That is bureaucracy speak for not worth the fuel to wipe out. He did not look like much. 2 arms, 2 legs, the strange flat face they have, brown skin gone gray tired under the dock lights. His clothing was a salvager's rig, scorched at one shoulder. He had been pulled off a derelict, I learned later, a human scrap runner who had drifted too far into Vael's claimed space and gotten snared by a patrol. A nobody, a nothing, the kind of cargo I move. The officer in charge was a conquered captain named Corvan. I knew him. Everyone on the lower decks knew Corvan and stayed clear of him. He was Drael, tall, ridged, fond of his own authority. He had the human by the back of the neck like you would hold a loose animal. Move, Corvan told him. The human moved, but here is the small thing I noticed, the thing that I have turned over in my head 1,000 times since. He did not move the way the rest of us move around power. He did not shrink. He walked like a man crossing his own kitchen. I remember thinking, that one does not understand what he is standing on top of. I was wrong. I think he understood completely. He had just decided it did not get to own how he carried himself. That is a human thing. I did not have a word for it yet. They were marching him toward the holding levels when the order came down to bring him to the command deck instead. The whole bay heard it crackle over the channel, because Corvin did not bother to keep his comm private. He wanted us to hear that he was talking to the top. Bring the human up, the sovereign wants to see it. You could feel the room change temperature. Soldiers who had been bored straightened up, because everyone knew what it meant when Vael wanted to see something herself. She did not collect prisoners. She did not do interviews. If Vael wanted to look at a thing personally, that thing did not usually keep its shape afterward. And here is where my own bad luck enters the story. I was the nearest hauler with a clear lift cart. Corvin needed the human transported up 2 heavy levels, and he was not going to carry him. He pointed at me without learning my name. They never learn our names, and said, "You, bring it up." So I loaded the most powerful event of my life onto a freight cart and pushed it toward the one room I had spent 11 years avoiding. The command deck of the anchorage was a cathedral built to make you feel small. Black floor polished until it threw back the stars, a ceiling so high it vanished into dark. Down both sides the officers conquered Asari, a few species I could not name standing in their ranks like they were on display. And at the far end, raised on a dais of dark stone, a single seat. She was in it. I want to describe her to you properly because the cameras never got it right. The official images of Vael always made her look like a statue. She was not a statue. She was worse. She was alive in a way that made the air around her feel thin. Taller than any 2 of us stacked. Skin the deep blue-black of deep water marked with the pale silver lines the Asari grow along their bodies, lines that pulse faintly when their psionic field is active. Hers was always active. You could feel it from across the room, a low pressure behind your eyes, the feeling of being watched by something that did not need eyes to do it. Her face was beautiful the way a cliff edge is beautiful. No warmth in it. None. She did not look at me. I was a cart. The cart was carrying the human. She looked at the human. I stopped where the floor markings told haulers to stop. I locked the cart. I should have backed away then. I was supposed to back away. But Corvin and his guards had crowded in behind me and there was no clean line out, so I did the only safe thing I knew how to do. I made myself a piece of the furniture. I knelt by the cart, head down, hands flat, and I waited to be forgotten. That is the only reason I saw everything. Because I was beneath their notice, and the ones beneath notice see the most. "Release it," Vael said. Her voice was quiet. That was the frightening part. She never had to raise it. The whole deck had gone so silent that quiet was enough. They cut the human's bindings. He rolled his shoulders, slow, the way you do when a cramp lets go. He looked up at her, up and up, and I braced for him to fold, to grovel, to do what every single one of us would have done. He didn't. He looked at her the way you look at a strange weather pattern, curious, wary, but not crushed. "You're her," he said, not a question, "the one they keep warning us about." A ripple went through the officers. You do not speak to her first. You do not speak to her at all unless she opens your mouth for you. Corvin started forward with his hand raised to strike him down. Vael lifted one finger. Corvin froze mid-step like a switch had been thrown. That is how it was, one finger. She rose from the seat. The silver lines along her arms brightened. She came down off the dais, and I swear to you the floor itself seemed to hold its breath, and she crossed the deck until she was standing over the human, close enough that her shadow swallowed him. This was the part everyone came to see. This was the part where she looked at the small thing and decided how it ended. She bent toward him, slow, studying. Her field pressed down so hard I felt it in my teeth. And then she stopped. I have replayed this moment more times than I can count. and I still do not have the full shape of it because what happened next happened inside her, where none of us could follow. But I saw the outside of it, and the outside was enough to break the deck open. She went still. Not the still of a predator. We all knew that still. We lived inside it. This was a different still. She had leaned in close to him, close to his neck, his shoulder, the warm, breathing animal heat of him, and something in her simply stopped. The silver lines along her arms, which had been bright and hard, flickered, dimmed, like a held breath letting go without permission. I watched the most powerful being in the galaxy go quiet in a way I did not have a name for. Her shoulders, I am telling you exactly what I saw, her shoulders dropped. A fraction, the smallest amount, the way yours do when you finally set down a weight you have carried so long you forgot it was a weight. Nobody else moved. I do not think anyone else understood what they were looking at. They thought she was about to kill him. They were waiting for the blow. The human noticed before any of the officers did. I saw his eyes change. The wariness in him shifted into something more careful, more puzzled, watching her the way she had been watching him a second ago. "You okay?" he said. To her, he asked her if she was okay. I think I stopped breathing. I think the whole deck did. Here is what I would only learn afterward in pieces, from things she let slip and things her old field medic let slip when he had drunk too much synth on a long shift. I am giving it to you now so the rest makes sense, even though I did not have it then. The Asari are an old species, older than the conquered, old enough that their bodies remember things their history has forgotten. And somewhere far back on a homeworld none of them had seen in 1,000 generations, the Asari had been prey before they were predators. Something hunted them, something patient, and their bodies adapted the only way bodies can. They learned to never, ever stand down, to never fully rest. To keep the field up, the muscles braced, the senses spread wide, asleep or awake, from the moment they are born to the moment they die. They lost the ability to feel safe. Think about that. Not metaphor, biology. There is a state your body drops into when it decides the danger has passed. Heart slows, shoulders fall, the deep animal guard lowers. The Asari had bred that state out of themselves to survive, so long ago that they no longer remembered they were missing it. They only knew that they were tired in a way that sleep never fixed, all of them, their whole long lives, and that the strongest among them were the most tired of all because they had the most to guard. Vael had never once in her entire life felt safe. Not as a child, not in victory, not for a single second. She did not even know it was a thing that could be felt. It had a hole in her where it should have been, and she had filled the hole with power, because power was the closest thing to safety she could build with her own hands. And then a small, soft, breakable creature was carried onto her deck on a freight cart, and she leaned in close, and his scent, the warm, living, particular chemistry of a human being, the thing humans carry without ever knowing they carry it, reached something in her so old she had no word for it. Her body recognized it, safe. For the first time in her life, every alarm that had ever screamed inside her went quiet, all at once. Like a city losing power block by block, until the only thing left was the dark and the silence and the unbearable, weightless feeling of not being braced. That is what a human scent did to the most powerful alien in the galaxy. It told her, in a language older than both their species, that she could finally put the weight down. She had no idea what was happening to her. She only knew that next to this fragile thing, for reasons she could not name, she did not want to keep standing up under it all anymore. But I did not know any of that yet. None of us did. On the deck, in that moment, all we saw was Vael frozen over a human, and a human asking her if she was okay, and a silence stretching past the point where silence is bearable. Corvan broke it. He was ambitious, Corvan. The kind of officer who reads a strange situation only for the opening it gives him. He saw his sovereign hesitating, a thing she had never done, and instead of fear, something greedy lit up behind his eyes. "My sovereign," he said, oily, stepping forward. "The creature is clearly some kind of contaminant, a biological hazard. We should put it in containment for dissection. Standard protocol for an unknown threat to your person." Dissection. The human heard it. Of course he heard it. He went very still in a different way than Vael had, the stillness of a creature that has just understood the room it is in. "I'm not a contaminant," he said evenly. "I'm a salvager. My name is Eli. I got lost. That's the whole crime." "It speaks out of turn," Corvin said, and he gestured to two of his soldiers. "Restrain it for transport to the medical bay." The soldiers moved, and I watched Eli the human make a choice that should have killed him. He stepped backward, not away, but to the side, putting his body between the soldiers and Vael, as if she were the one who needed protecting, as if the small, soft thing had decided to stand guard over the strongest being in the galaxy. "Don't touch her," Eli said to the soldiers about her. I think it was the single most insane thing I have ever heard a living creature say. The deck did not know what to do with it. The officers looked to Vael for the order that would erase him. Corvin's soldiers hesitated, rifles half raised, because nobody had ever needed instructions for a situation this far outside the rules. And Vael straightened. Slowly, the lines along her arms came back up, brighter than before, and the pressure of her field came down on the deck so hard that two of the lesser officers actually staggered. The safe feeling, the quiet, whatever it had been, she pulled it back inside herself and bricked over it because she was Vael, and Vael did not let anything be seen. But she did not give the order to take him. "Captain Corvin," she said, and her voice had gone cold even by her standards, "you wish to cut open the only living thing that has stood between me and harm since the day I was born." Corvin blinked. "My sovereign, it is no threat. It cannot harm you." "I did not say it could harm me." She turned her head and the full weight of her attention landed on Corvin, and I watched a conquered captain age a decade in a heartbeat. "I said it stood between us. You have served me 11 years, Corvin. Tell me, in 11 years, have you ever once stepped between me and danger?" The silence answered for him. "No," she said softly. "You stepped behind, always behind, as they all do, as everything has my whole life." Her gaze swept the ranks of officers, and one by one they dropped their eyes. "This creature does not know what I am. It does not know it should be afraid. And knowing nothing, owing me nothing, it chose to put its small, breakable body between me and a threat it believed was real." She looked back down at Eli. "No one," she said, very quietly, almost to herself, "has ever done that for me." I need you to understand how impossible that sentence was. She had armies, she had fleets, she had 10,000 soldiers who would have died on her command and called it an honor, but that is not the same thing. That is duty pointed at her. That is fear pointed at her. None of it had ever been for her. Nobody guards the storm. Nobody worries the cliff might get hurt. You do not protect the most powerful thing in the room, you survive it. For her whole life, Vael had been the most protected being alive and the least protected, both at once. Surrounded, utterly alone. And a human who had known her for 90 seconds had stepped sideways to shield her from his own captors, on instinct, because that is a thing humans do. They put themselves between danger and whatever they have decided to care about, even when it makes no sense, even when the thing they are guarding could crush them without effort. I did not understand it then. I understand it now. That sideways step was the most human thing in the galaxy, and it landed on the one being who had spent 1,000 years of evolution and a lifetime of war, never once being on the receiving end of it. Corvin made his last mistake then. He was cornered, and cornered ambition gets stupid. He must have decided that the human had unbalanced his sovereign somehow, bewitched her, hazarded her something, and that the path back to her favor was through removing it fast, before she could be further compromised. He drew his sidearm and aimed it at Eli's head. "For your protection, my sovereign," he said, and his finger tightened. Three things happened in the space of one breath. The first, Eli the human moved, not away toward. He lunged at Corvin, this unarmed soft creature throwing himself at an armed conquered captain because that is the other human thing, the thing I am still learning the size of. They do not calculate the odds first. They move and they calculate later if they survive to calculate at all. The second, I Gemin, 11 years of keeping my hands moving and my head down, did the most reckless thing of my entire life. I do not know why. I have asked myself 1,000 times. I shoved the freight cart, hard, straight into the back of Corvin's legs because it was the only thing I had and it was right there. He buckled. His shot went wide and burned a black scar across that polished floor. And the third, Vael caught the human. I did not see her move. None of us did. One instant she was on the dais, and the next she was simply there between Eli and the ricochet, one massive hand closing around the human and pulling him in against her like he weighed nothing, shielding his soft body with her own armored one. The strongest being in the galaxy, stepping between a human and harm. I understood in that frozen instant that I was watching something the universe had never seen before. Not because she was powerful. We had all seen her power. Because for the first time, her power was pointed outward, at protecting one small life, instead of at proving she did not need anyone to protect hers. The deck went into chaos for about 4 seconds, and then it went into something much worse than chaos. It went still around her, the way the sea goes still in the eye of the storm, because Vael was standing in the center of it with a human cradled against her, and an expression on her face that not one officer in that room had ever survived seeing before. Corvin scrambled up off the floor where my cart had put him. He still had the sidearm. I think, by then, he knew he was already dead, that there was no walking this back, and I think that is the only reason he was brave enough to keep talking. "My sovereign, look at yourself," he said, and his voice cracked. "You're shielding it. You don't shield, you're not, this isn't," he swallowed. "It's done something to you, can't you feel it? It's made you weak." And Vael, with the human safe in the curl of her arm, looked at her captain of 11 years, and she did something I had never once seen her do. She smiled. It was not a kind smile, but it was real, and it reached all the way up into her, and it was the most terrifying and the most human thing I had seen all day. "Weak," she repeated. She set Eli down behind her, gently, the way you set down something you have decided is yours to keep. Then she turned the full weight of herself on Corvin, and the lights along her arms blazed so bright the whole deck threw double shadows, and the pressure of her field came down like a falling sky, and her quiet voice filled every corner of that cathedral room without ever once being raised. "You have it backward, Captain," she said. "For my entire life I have been the strongest thing in every room, and I have never been able to set the weight of it down for a single breath. Do you understand what that does to a body? To carry the whole sky alone awake every second for 1,000 years. Corvin said nothing. There was nothing to say. "This creature," Vael went on, and she did not look back at Eli, but I saw something in her face soften toward him anyway. "This small, breakable, ridiculous creature walked onto my deck and made my body remember a thing my species forgot before your homeworld had a name. It did not make me weak, Corvin." She took one step toward him. The whole room flinched. "It reminded me that I am allowed to be strong for something instead of strong against everything. And that," she said, "is a difference you will never live long enough to understand." She did not kill Corvin. I want you to sit with that because everyone who hears this story expects the kill. I expected it. The whole deck expected it. There is a rhythm to power, and the rhythm says that when a captain points a weapon and speaks of weakness, the captain dies and the room learns its lesson from the body. Vael broke the rhythm. She stood over him. He had gone down on one knee by then, not in respect but because his legs had stopped holding him, and she looked at him for a long moment, and the lights along her arms slowly came down to a dull glow. "You drew a weapon on my deck," she said. "On a guest of mine. The old version of me would open you up where you kneel and the room would call it justice, and tomorrow they would forget your name. She tilted her head. But the old version of me carried everything alone, Corvin, and I am tired of how heavy that was. So I am going to do something heavier instead. I'm going to let you live and I'm going to let you watch. Watch what? Corvin said. His voice was barely there. Everything changed, Vael said. She had him stripped of rank and confined, not executed. And let me tell you, that was scarier to the officers than a killing would have been. A killing they understood. Mercy from Vael was a thing with no precedent. And a thing with no precedent is the most frightening thing of all to people who have built their whole lives on knowing the rules. Half the deck would have preferred she killed him just so the universe would still make sense. It was the human who broke the spell. Eli stepped out from behind her. She let him, which I noticed, because she had been keeping her body angled to shield him without seeming to know she was doing it, and he looked around at the frozen officers, at the burned scar on the floor, at Corvin on his knees, and he let out a long breath. "Okay," he said. "So, that was a lot." He looked up at Vael. "Are you actually going to dissect me, or was that just him?" I think the whole deck stopped breathing again at the casualness of it. "You did not banter with the sovereign. You did not survive bantering with the sovereign." Vael looked down at him, and something happened to her face, a loosening, a flicker of the thing I had seen earlier when she first leaned close. "No," she said. "I am not going to dissect you." "Cool," Eli said. "Yeah, cool." He rubbed the back of his neck, this small human gesture, and I watched the most powerful being in the galaxy track the movement of his hand like it was the most interesting thing she had ever seen. "Can I sit down? I've been on a prison shuttle for 2 days and my whole body hurts." And she, Vael, the storm, the cliff edge, she said, "Yes." She had a chair brought, for a captured salvager, on her command deck. Officers who had stood at attention for hours without water watched a human get a chair, and not one of them dared say a word. Here is the part nobody believes when I tell it. She did not want him to leave. She did not say it. She would not have known how. But I was kneeling there by my dented cart. Everyone had forgotten me, which by then I was grateful for, and I watched her invent reasons. First it was security. "The creature must be debriefed," she announced. "It has been in our space. It may have seen fleet movements." Nobody believed a lost salvager had seen anything, but nobody argued. Then it was medical. "It is injured. It will be treated before it is released." His lip was split and he had some bruising, nothing a med station couldn't fix in an hour, but she assigned him to her own field medic and kept him on the upper levels for 3 days. Then she stopped inventing reasons, because by then everyone had stopped expecting them. I learned the rest of this from her medic later, the one who drank too much. He told me that on the first night, Vael did something she had not done in living memory. She slept, not the half-sleep the Asari take, the one where the field stays up and the body stays braced and they wake more tired than they lay down. Real sleep. The kind the rest of us take for granted. The medic said her field readings dropped to levels he had never recorded in an adult Asari, levels you only saw in the very young before the bracing sets in for life. And he said it only happened when the human was in the room. They tried to test it quietly, the way medics test things. They moved Eli to a different level overnight. Vael's field spiked back up within the hour. Her body went back on guard. They moved him back. She came down again. It was not a feeling. It was not infatuation, the way the cruder soldiers whispered. It was chemical, biological, bone-deep, her ancient body reading a human's living scent as the all-clear signal it had been straining to hear for 1,000 years and never once received. He was, to her body, the sound of the danger finally passing. She could not have explained it. He certainly couldn't, but the medic could. And the medic told me, and now I am telling you. Part 2 of 2 now I have to tell you about the part that got dangerous. Because a thing like that, the most powerful being in the galaxy needing a specific small, fragile creature in order to feel safe, that is not a sweet story to the people who run things. That is a vulnerability. And the galaxy is full of people who collect vulnerabilities. Word got out. It always does. Corvin, even confined, had friends. Friends who carried the story off the anchorage and up the chain to the conquered high table, the council of old powers who tolerated Vael only because they could not beat her, and who had spent a generation waiting for any crack in her at all. And here was the crack. Here was the impossible gift. The sovereign has a weakness, and it is small and soft, and it can be taken. I want to tell you that I learned this in some clever way. I didn't. I learned it because I had stopped being invisible. After the cart, Vael had, and I still do not fully understand why, had me reassigned. From cargo to her personal staff. A gammon hauler, 11 years of keeping his head down, suddenly carrying messages on the command levels. I asked her once, much later, why. She said, "You shoved a cart into an armed captain to protect a stranger. You did not calculate the odds first. You moved." She looked at me the way she looked at Eli sometimes. I am learning to value that. So I was there on the upper levels the day the conquered delegation arrived. They came under a flag of parley, 3 high-table envoys and an honor guard that was not really an honor guard. You could tell. Too many of them, too well-armed, eyes that counted exits. The lead envoy was a Sethri, tall, pale, gracious in the way of people who have never once meant a kind word. "Sovereign Vael," the envoy said, all silk. "The high table sends felicitations. We hear you have acquired a curiosity. A human. We would so like to study it. For the good of all conquered species, of course. We propose to take it into shared custody." I was standing near the wall with the rest of the staff, and I felt the room go cold, because we all understood. Take it into custody meant take her safety away. It meant cutting out the one thing that let her rest and holding it hostage and owning her through it. It was the oldest move there is. You cannot defeat the strong, so you find the soft thing they need and you put your hand around it. Vael understood too. I watched her understand it. And I watched her do something that, knowing her, must have cost more than any battle she had ever fought. She did not roar. She did not blaze. She kept her field low, deliberately low, I realized, because she did not want them to see how much she wanted to use it. She kept her voice even. "Human is not for study," she said. "Is under my protection. It will remain so." Envoy smiled. "Protection? How? Sentimental. The high table was concerned you might say that. You see, sovereign attachment is a liability, and the table cannot allow the galaxy's foremost power to operate while compromised by what was the medical term, a biological dependency." The smile sharpened. "Surrender the human and the table overlooks this lapse. Refuse, and we are forced to consider you unfit, unstable, a danger requiring management." There it was. The trap with no good exit. Give up the one thing that had let her feel safe for the first time in her life, or be declared mad and have the whole conquered turned against her, all to take it from her anyway. And here is where the human did the thing that I will carry with me until I die. Eli had been brought up to the receiving hall. They had asked for him to be present, to verify the specimen. And Vael had allowed it because refusing would have looked like hiding him. He had been standing quietly off to the side, listening, this small soft creature watching the great powers of the galaxy decide his fate over his head. He stepped forward. "Excuse me," Eli said. The envoy turned mildly. "The specimen speaks. Charming." "Yeah, the specimen speaks." Eli walked into the center of the hall, into the open space between Vael and the conquered delegation, and he stood there, small and unarmored, with the most powerful beings in the galaxy on either side of him. "I've been listening, and I want to make sure I've got this right. You're saying she's dangerous because she finally found one thing in the whole universe that lets her sleep at night. That's the problem, not the fleets, not the wars, the sleeping." Envoy's smile flickered. "You misunderstand the no, I think I understand it fine." Eli's voice was steady. I have thought about that steadiness so many times. He was a scrap runner, a nobody. And he stood in front of the high table and the sovereign, and he did not shake. "You don't actually care that she's strong. You've lived with her being strong your whole lives. What you can't stand is that she might stop being only strong, that she might have one soft thing. Because a person with one soft thing, that's a person. And you can't rule a person the way you can manage a weapon." Silence. "You want to take me away from her," Eli went on, "so she goes back to never resting. Back to bracing every second. Back to being the lonely, terrifying thing you can all point at and feel small around but secretly feel superior to, because at least you get to feel things and she doesn't." He shook his head slowly. "That's not management, that's cruelty with paperwork." Envoy recovered. "They always do." "Sentiment aside," it said coldly, "the specimen does not have standing to refuse the high table. It is property under salvage law. It will be, he has standing, Vael said. The whole hall turned. She had not moved from her place, but everything about her had changed. The field she had kept so carefully low was coming up now, slow and enormous, like a tide that does not hurry because it does not need to. The silver lines along her arms lit one by one. He is not property, she said. I have entered him into the rolls of my household as a free citizen of my domain. As of an hour ago, the documents are filed. The witnesses are sealed. She looked at me when she said witnesses, and I realized that message I had carried up that morning, the one I had not read that had been the filing. She had done it before the delegation even landed. She had seen this coming, and she had quietly, legally made him a person before they could arrive to make him a thing. You filed, the envoy's composure cracked for the first time. You cannot simply. I am the sovereign of this domain, Vael said, and within it I can simply. You came to take a specimen. There is no specimen here. There is a citizen of mine under my law on my station. The tide of her field reached the delegation now, and I watched the honor guard's hands twitch toward weapons they were not going to be allowed to draw. You may petition the high table to dispute my domestic roles through the proper channels. It will take 11 years. I have time. Envoy tried one last thing. They always have one last thing. And when the table declares you unfit, it hissed, dropping the silk. When the combined fleets come to manage you and your pet, what then? You cannot fight all of us. Not even you. Attachment has made you reckless. Vael, I get a chill telling this part even now. Vael laughed. Soft, real. You have it backward, she said, and it was the same phrase she had used on Corvin, and it landed even harder the second time. You think he made me reckless. You think a being who needs nothing is the most dangerous kind. You are wrong, and you have always been wrong, and it is why you have spent a generation afraid of me instead of allied with me. She stepped forward, and the delegation stepped back, all of them, the envoy too. Being who needs nothing has nothing to lose, and a being with nothing to lose is not careful, she said. I was that being for 1,000 years. I did not value what I might break because I valued nothing, including myself. You should have been terrified of me then, and you were right to be. Her voice dropped. But now I have one thing I will not lose, and do you understand what that does? It does not make me weak. It makes me careful. It gives me a reason to keep this galaxy standing because he has to live somewhere, and I would prefer that somewhere not be on fire. She let that sit. You came here thinking you found my weakness, she said. You found the first thing that ever made me want the universe to be better than I am. If you are wise, and your records suggest you are not, you will go home and tell the table that the sovereign is, for the first time in her life, a creature with something to protect, and that there has never been anything in the galaxy more dangerous than that. Delegation left. They did not come back. Not with fleets. Not with envoys. The table, I am told, debated it for a long time and arrived at the only sane conclusion, which was that a Vael with a reason to keep things whole was infinitely preferable to a Vael who had never had a reason for anything. They had spent a generation wishing she would become more predictable. She had. They simply had not expected it to come in the shape of a soft thing she would defend rather than a soft thing they could steal. I will tell you how it ended, the part you can see, and then I will tell you the part you cannot, and then I will let you go. Eli stayed. Not as a prisoner, not as a pet, not as the strange dependency the medics had charted. He stayed because she asked him to, actually asked, with words, which the medic told me she practiced before she did it, because she had never asked anyone for anything in her whole life and did not know the shape of the sentence. And he said yes because, and he told me this himself much later on a quiet shift, because nobody's ever needed me to just be around, man. Not need me to do anything. Just be there so they can finally rest. You know how big that is. To be the reason somebody gets to stop being scared. He fixed things mostly. Old salvager habits. He kept a small workshop on one of the upper levels, and the soldiers learned to bring him broken gear. And slowly, this is the part that changed everything. The soldiers learned that Vael's human was kind, and that kindness was a thing you were allowed to have on the anchorage now, and the whole station began, very slowly, to breathe differently. She changed too. Not soft, never soft, do not misunderstand me. She was still the most powerful being in the galaxy, and she still ended threats with a quiet word. But she rested now. She slept. And a being that has finally slept after 1,000 years awake makes different choices than a being running on 1,000 years of exhaustion. Fewer wars, more that got built than burned. The historians have noticed it, that period, the long calm. They have theories. None of them know it started with a freight cart and a captured salvager and an old part of her that woke up and said safe for the first time. Here is the part you cannot see. Years later, I was old by then, and she let me retire to the upper levels, which is a story for another day. I asked her if she ever resented it. The dependence, needing him to rest. A being like her, owing her peace to something so breakable. She thought about it for a long time. Then she said, for 1,000 years I was the strongest thing alive, and I was the most alone, and I told myself the two went together. That strength meant carrying it by yourself. That needing was a kind of dying. She looked out at the stars. He taught me I had it backward. The need was not the weakness. The carrying it alone was the weakness. I just called it strength because I did not know there was anything else. She was quiet a moment. The galaxy feared me because I needed nothing, she said. It should have feared what I would become when I finally let myself need one thing. So would I if I had known. I would have run from it. A pause. I am so glad I did not get the chance to run. That is the whole of it. The way it really happened before they smoothed it into legend. People tell it now like a fairy story. The warlord and the human. They make her gentle in the telling, and she was not gentle. They make him a hero, and he was a scrap runner who got lost and refused to grovel. They leave out the freight cart and the dented legs and the small gray gamin who shoved it, because the small gray ones always get left out, and that is all right. I know I was there. But here is what I want you to take if you take anything. She had all the power in the galaxy, and it never once let her rest. He had no power at all, and he gave her the only thing she had never been able to take by force. And the lesson the galaxy is still slow to learn, the one I have watched empires miss over and over, is this. The strongest thing in any room is not the one who needs nothing. It is the one who has finally found something worth being gentle for. And she found hers because a small, soft, breakable creature was carried onto her deck on a freight cart, and leaned close, and smelled to the oldest part of her, exactly like the danger was finally over. That is when everything changed. That is when she finally got to rest.